How far can betrayal go when it comes from the one person who's supposed to love you unconditionally? Imagine the shock, the heartache, the confusion when you realize the person you've known your entire life, the one who shared your childhood memories, could turn on you in the most brutal way imaginable. What could possibly drive someone to stab their own sister 20 times? It's the kind of crime that leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about family and trust. Tonight, we uncover the disturbing details of murder that shook a community to its core and a family that could never be the same. This wasn't just a moment of rage. It was something darker, something that had been building beneath the surface for years. From the outside, they were the perfect family, their bond unbreakable. But as we'll soon find out, that was a lie. This is a chilling tale of secrets, jealousy, and desperation that will leave you questioning. What kind of pain could push someone across that line? Emma and Lucy Jones grew up in the heart of Chicago, a city where the skyline pierced the sky and the streets pulsed with life day and night. Their apartment, located in one of the quieter parts of the city, wasn't much different from the others around it. Modest and functional, nestled between rows of tall buildings. From the outside, it seemed like a typical inner-city home. Gray brick walls, faded window panes, and the hum of traffic always in the background. But for Emma and Lucy, it was their haven, a place filled with memories, both good and bad, that would haunt them for years to come. Emma, the older sister, was always seen as the responsible one, with a determined, no-nonsense attitude. She worked tirelessly to ensure everything in their lives ran smoothly. She was the one who took care of their mother when she was sick, the one who made sure Lucy stayed out of trouble, and the one who pushed herself harder than anyone to create a stable life for herself. Emma was focused and logical, and often took the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had big dreams, but those dreams were always overshadowed by the responsibilities she felt toward her family. Lucy, on the other hand, was the free-spirited younger sister, wild and impulsive. Lucy had an energy about her that was magnetic. Where Emma was grounded, Lucy was unpredictable, constantly seeking excitement and adventure. She loved to live in the moment, with little concern for the future. She had a knack for making friends and never hesitated to follow her heart, even when it led her down risky paths. Though they were different in so many ways, the bond between the sisters was unshakable. They had always been there for each other through thick and thin, growing up in the city with all its chaos and charm. Their connection had been forged in shared experiences, late-night talks, shared laughter, and the comfort of knowing that, no matter what happened, they would always have each other. Or so they thought. The apartment where they grew up was where the sisters shared their most intimate moments. It was where Emma would confide in Lucy about her struggles, where Lucy would dream out loud about her future, a future filled with adventure and possibilities. But beneath the surface of the seemingly close relationship, things had started to shift. Emma's sense of responsibility began to wear her down, and Lucy's carefree attitude began to alienate her. Emma grew tired of playing the role of caretaker, while Lucy grew frustrated with Emma's expectations. The tension was subtle at first, just small disagreements, a sharp word here or there. But over time, it built up. What no one knew was that the sisters' once unbreakable bond had begun to crumble from within. The things they had kept hidden, unsaid words, unresolved sibling rivalry, old grudges, unaddressed feelings, were quietly surfacing. The love that had once been the foundation of their relationship was gradually shifting, turning into something darker, something far more toxic. It wasn't just the small arguments anymore, or the occasional flare-ups. It was a growing divide that neither could bridge. The tension between them was palpable, like an invisible wall that seemed to get higher and thicker with every passing day. And then everything changed, completely and irrevocably. What had been simmering beneath the surface for months, maybe even years, finally erupted in the most unimaginable way. A sudden, violent act shattered the illusion of peace they had once shared. And in a single, horrifying moment, the course of their lives was altered forever. Emma and Lucy had always been close, two sisters who grew up not just as family, but as best friends. In their shared childhood, there was no one else they trusted more than each other. They were each other's confidant, support system, and constant companion. From inside jokes to secret plans, everything in their world revolved around this deep, unspoken bond. But adulthood has a way of shifting the dynamics. And as time passed, the differences between Emma and Lucy began to emerge. It was subtle at first. Emma, the older and more grounded of the two, had always been the one to look after Lucy. Lucy, on the other hand, had a carefree spirit. Always the life of the party, always seeking adventure. But as they moved into their 20s, Lucy's impulsiveness started to take a darker turn. Emma noticed the change. Lucy's usual laughter was often replaced by silence, and her impulsive decisions seemed less about fun and more about escape. In the weeks leading up to the tragic event, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her phone would buzz late into the night with frantic messages from Lucy, sometimes cryptic, sometimes full of anger or confusion. Lucy's eyes seemed distant when they spoke, like she was seeing something Emma couldn't. Her behavior was erratic. One day she was happy, making jokes and planning trips, and the next she was withdrawing, shutting everyone out. Emma tried to reach out, but the more she pushed, the more Lucy pulled away. The tension was building. Small signs began to appear, each one more unsettling than the last. One evening, Emma arrived at Lucy's apartment unannounced, only to find her pacing around, barely acknowledging her presence. When Emma asked if everything was all right, Lucy responded with a sharp, almost angry tone. "Don't worry about me." It was the first time Emma truly felt afraid for her sister. Around this time, Emma began to notice changes in Lucy's circle of friends. The people Lucy once surrounded herself with, those who shared her free-spirited lifestyle, had either vanished or started acting strangely. It was as though Lucy was losing the connections she once had. And with every passing day, she seemed to sink deeper into herself. Emma was left to wonder what was going on behind closed doors. What was Lucy hiding? And more importantly, what had caused the change? Despite her attempt to reach out, Emma found herself increasingly locked out of Lucy's world. Phone calls went unanswered. Text messages were met with terse responses. And any time Emma tried to get together for a simple coffee or chat, Lucy found a way to make excuses. A part of Emma knew that Lucy was spiraling, but another part of her couldn't fathom how far her sister was falling. Emma's unease grew into a constant knot in her stomach. She felt like she was losing her sister, and the feeling was both terrifying and heartbreaking. She knew Lucy had always been a free spirit, but this was something different. Something was seriously wrong, but Emma couldn't put her finger on it. Every conversation, every interaction, felt like a fragile thread about to snap. Then, one evening, Emma received a call from Lucy that sent chills down her spine. It wasn't a cry for help or a desperate plea for understanding. This call was cold. There was a flatness to Lucy's voice, a detachment Emma had never heard before. "I'm fine," Lucy said, her tone flat and emotionless. "I just need to be alone for a while." Emma felt the weight of those words, as if Lucy was saying goodbye without actually saying it. As the days wore on, Emma found herself trapped in a mounting sense of dread. She couldn't explain it, but everything about Lucy's behavior was starting to feel like a ticking time bomb. Emma tried to tell herself it was just a phase, that things would return to normal eventually. But deep down, she knew something was about to break. She couldn't help but think, how far could things really go? Would it all spiral out of control? Or was there something far more sinister at play? Something darker than she could imagine? In the days before the incident, Emma tried once more to make sense of her sister's actions. She was determined to understand, to fix it, to save Lucy from whatever was consuming her. But as she stood outside Lucy's apartment that fateful evening, she had no idea that the final confrontation was already underway. A confrontation that would change their lives and their relationship forever. The night everything unraveled started off quietly. The city outside was its usual symphony of noise. Cars honking in the distance, muffled voices from neighboring apartments, and the hum of a late-night television show bleeding through the walls. Inside Lucy's apartment, however, the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your stomach churn before a storm. Emma stood by the doorway, her face pale and tired, while Lucy paced the room, her steps quick and restless. It wasn't unusual for Lucy to be moody lately, but tonight was different. Emma had come over at Lucy's request. expecting to talk through whatever had been troubling her sister. But from the moment she arrived, it was clear this wasn't going to be a conversation. Lucy's words were sharp, her tone cutting. She hurled accusations at Emma, blaming her for things that didn't make sense. Emma tried to interject to calm her down, but every word seemed to add more fuel to the fire. The argument escalated quickly, spiraling out of control in ways neither of them could have foreseen. Lucy's voice grew louder, her words slurred and venomous. Emma, who had always been the patient one, felt her own temper rising. She could feel the weight of years of frustration bubbling to the surface. Frustration over the constant need to play the caretaker, over Lucy's reckless decisions, and over the growing divide between them. The sisters had fought before, but not like this. This wasn't just an argument. It was an explosion of everything they'd been holding back. At one point, Lucy threw her hands up in exasperation and stormed into the kitchen. Emma followed, trying to get her to listen, but Lucy wouldn't stop yelling. "You don't care about me." Lucy spat, her eyes wild with anger. "You never have. You only ever wanted to control me." Emma froze. Those words hit her like a slap in the face. How could Lucy believe that? All she'd ever done was try to protect her. The kitchen, dimly lit by a single bulb above the sink, felt claustrophobic. Emma stood there, her mind racing, her heart pounding in her chest. Lucy's accusations kept coming, each one sharper than the last. Emma could feel her grip on the situation slipping. Her sister's voice felt like it was closing in on her. And for a brief moment, she thought about leaving, just walking out the door and letting Lucy cool off. But she couldn't. Not after everything they'd been through. Not tonight. Then it happened. In a moment of raw emotion, Lucy grabbed a plate from the counter and hurled it against the wall. The sound of it shattering made Emma flinch. It wasn't the first time Lucy had lashed out physically during an argument, but this felt different. The look in her eyes wasn't anger. It was desperation. She was unraveling right in front of Emma, and Emma didn't know how to stop it. "Lucy, stop!" Emma shouted, her voice shaking. "What are you doing? You're scaring me." But Lucy didn't stop. She stepped closer to Emma, her hands trembling, her face a mask of anguish. "You've ruined everything," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You've ruined my life." Something inside Emma snapped. Maybe it was the months of bottled-up tension. Maybe it was the weight of feeling responsible for Lucy's chaos. Or maybe it was just the heat of the moment. Whatever it was, Emma found herself reaching for the knife on the counter. She didn't think. She just acted. What happened next was a blur. Emma's mind went blank, her body moving on autopilot. One moment she was standing there, pleading with Lucy to calm down. The next, she was holding the knife, her hands shaking, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Lucy took a step back, her expression shifting from anger to fear. "Emma," she said quietly, her voice trembling, "what are you doing?" But Emma wasn't thinking clearly anymore. All she could feel was the weight of everything crashing down around her. The years of resentment, the exhaustion, the helplessness. She couldn't hear Lucy's words. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding like a drum in her ears. The first strike was quick, almost instinctive. Lucy gasped, her eyes wide with shock, and stumbled backward. Emma froze, the knife still in her hand, her mind reeling. She hadn't meant to do it. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. But then Lucy lunged at her hands clawing at Emma's arms, and everything spiraled out of control. The room was filled with the sounds of their struggle. The crash of dishes hitting the floor, the scrape of chairs being pushed aside, and the dull, sickening thud of a knife meeting flesh. It wasn't until it was over, until Lucy lay motionless on the floor, that Emma realized what she'd done. Her hands were covered in blood, her chest heaving as she stared down at her sister's lifeless body. The apartment was silent now. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Emma dropped the knife, her fingers trembling, and took a step back. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could do was stare at Lucy, her mind replaying the events of the past few minutes over and over again. How had it come to this? How had their love turned into this? As the reality of what she'd done began to sink in, Emma collapsed to her knees. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out, her hands hovering over Lucy's body, but not quite touching her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to," but the words caught in her throat. No apology could undo what had happened. No explanation could make sense of the horror she had just unleashed. And in that moment, Emma realized her life would never be the same. What could have driven Emma to take such an extreme step, to commit an act of violence against the person she had loved and protected her entire life, to stab her sister, her flesh and blood, 20 times? The act itself is chilling, but the deeper question remains. What was going on in Emma's mind in those final moments? In examining this, we have to start with the psychological dynamics at play. Emma wasn't a cold, calculated killer. She wasn't someone who went through life with violent intentions. She was, by all accounts, the responsible one, the protector, the one who always put others before herself. But what happens when that facade cracks? What happens when the weight of being the strong one becomes too much to bear? Years of suppressed emotions, a constant sense of obligation, and a strained relationship with Lucy may have created a perfect storm for this tragic outburst. Emma had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time, watching her sister's life spiral out of control, feeling the pressure to always be there, always be the steady hand in their relationship. But Emma was human, and even the most selfless people have breaking points. Imagine being in Emma's shoes for a moment. You've spent years watching your sister's chaotic, often reckless behavior. You've picked up the pieces for her time and time again, putting your own life on hold. Maybe it started with small things, like cleaning up Lucy's messes, smoothing over conflicts, or offering financial help. But the longer it went on, the more Emma's frustration grew. And the more her frustration grew, the more the resentment built up. There's a psychological term for this: caregiver fatigue. It's a phenomenon where someone in a caregiving role becomes emotionally exhausted, often to the point of breakdown. For Emma, this exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She had become the emotional caretaker for Lucy, dealing with her erratic behavior, listening to her rants, and trying to fix the unfixable. There comes a point when the constant emotional toll becomes unbearable. And when that happens, even the strongest can lose their grip. But there's more to it than just burnout. Research has shown that when people experience intense emotional stress or trauma, their brains undergo significant changes. These changes can impair judgment, heighten impulsivity, and trigger extreme reactions that seem out of character. Emma's actions may have been the result of a sudden emotional overload, where everything that had been buried inside her for years finally broke free. This is where the what-ifs come into play. Could this have been prevented? Could Emma have seen the signs of her emotional unraveling before it reached this point? Could Lucy have recognized the strain on her sister and sought help before it escalated? But there are also other factors to consider. Could Emma have had underlying psychological struggles that she had been suppressing for years? Could there have been a deeper issue, maybe even a psychological disorder, that had gone unnoticed? It's difficult to say, but it's not entirely unlikely. Conditions like anxiety disorders, depression, or even personality disorders can manifest in ways that leave individuals emotionally numb or prone to intense emotional outbursts. Was Emma suffering from something that had been undiagnosed, unspoken, and ignored? Did she ever confide in anyone about her struggles? Or was she too overwhelmed, too ashamed to admit that she was struggling? In the weeks leading up to the murder, there were signs of instability. Emotional breakdowns, erratic behavior, and uncharacteristic actions from both Emma and Lucy. Could this have been a cry for help from both of them? Were their arguments just a symptom of something much deeper, something neither of them fully understood at the time? Here's another unsettling thought. What if Emma was manipulated into this? What if Lucy, who had always been the more unpredictable of the two, used her erratic behavior to push Emma to the edge? Could Lucy have been aware of her sister's breaking point and deliberately antagonize her to elicit a violent response? It's impossible to know for sure, but psychological manipulation and gaslighting can have a profound impact on a person's sense of reality. We also can't discount the sheer power of family dynamics. Growing up in a close-knit, emotionally charged environment creates bonds that are not only strong, but also complicated. The lines between love, responsibility, and resentment can blur in a way that is almost impossible to navigate. Emma and Lucy had spent their entire lives together, navigating childhood, adolescence, and adulthood in tandem. But as their relationship evolved, so too did the complexities of their bond. What was once a source of comfort became a source of stress, guilt, and overwhelming responsibility for Emma. This psychological breakdown doesn't absolve Emma of her actions, but it does shed light on the internal struggle that may have contributed to that fateful night. The simple, horrifying truth is that the mind is a fragile thing. In moments of extreme emotional distress, it's capable of things we can't fully comprehend. And for Emma, that night, when everything seemed to spiral out of control, was the breaking point. As we process the question of what could have driven Emma to kill her sister, we must remember that human behavior is not always straightforward. The mind, under duress, can be a battlefield of its own. And sometimes, in that chaotic inner turmoil, even the people we love the most have become the targets of our deepest frustrations. When the police arrived at the scene, the magnitude of what had occurred hit them immediately. The house, once a symbol of family life, was now the setting of a horrific crime. Lucy lay lifeless on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood, and Emma, the person responsible for the brutality, was eerily calm. At first glance, there seemed to be no signs of a struggle, no frenzy, no desperation. It was as if Emma had carefully planned every move. And yet, as the investigation unfolded, it became clear this wasn't a carefully orchestrated crime. It was a violent culmination of months, even years, of emotional and psychological strain. The detectives began their work, combing through the house for any piece of evidence that could shed light on what had transpired. It was a relatively quiet, modest home filled with the remnants of a life lived together. Photos of family vacations, mementos from birthdays and holidays, images of a seemingly happy family. But beneath these innocuous reminders of the past, there were hidden clues. The kitchen was where the tragedy had taken place. The place where Emma had picked up the knife, a tool she had used so many times before for mundane tasks like chopping vegetables. Now, it had become a symbol of violence, reflecting the depths of Emma's emotional unraveling. At first, Emma's calm demeanor perplexed the investigators. She didn't seem panicked or remorseful. She was almost attached. When they questioned her, she answered in a flat tone, offering minimal details, as if the enormity of the crime hadn't fully sunk in. She wasn't resisting arrest, nor was she pleading for mercy. It was as if the person who had committed the crime was no longer the same person sitting before them. The first breakthrough came when detectives dug into Emma's past. They began reviewing the family history, an archive of old photographs, diaries, and social media posts that, at first glance, appeared to paint a picture of a tight-knit, loving family. But the deeper they looked, the more they began to uncover disturbing patterns. Emma, who had always been known for her nurturing and selfless nature, had been hiding her struggles for years. Beneath her calm exterior, she had been battling severe depression, something she had kept hidden from those closest to her. It wasn't just the stress of taking care of Lucy. Emma's emotional state had been deteriorating long before that. The pressure of being the strong one for her family had taken a toll on her mental health, and she had never asked for help. Even her closest friends were shocked when the news broke. They described Emma as someone who would go out of her way to help others, someone who never seemed to complain. But as detectives spoke to those who knew her best, it became clear that Emma had been silently struggling with feelings of inadequacy and resentment. Resentment toward Lucy, who had often been the center of attention, and toward the world, for making her feel like she had to bear the emotional weight of everyone around her. In addition to Emma's personal struggles, the police found a troubling pattern of emotional isolation. Over the past few months, Emma had withdrawn from her usual social circles. Her friends reported that she had become increasingly distant, rarely answering calls or messages. Her once bustling social life had been replaced with long hours at home, alone with her thoughts and growing frustrations. In some of the text messages recovered from Emma's phone, she expressed feelings of hopelessness and self-loathing, emotions that were growing stronger as her relationship with Lucy continued to deteriorate. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place when investigators looked into the sisters' recent interactions. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Emma and Lucy had been involved in a series of heated arguments. Tensions had reached a breaking point. Emma's feelings of being unappreciated and overwhelmed were becoming more pronounced, while Lucy's behavior had become increasingly erratic. But the night of the murder was the final straw. In the heat of the moment, everything that had been festering inside Emma, her anger, her frustration, her confusion, exploded. It wasn't just a spontaneous outburst. It was a culmination of everything she'd been feeling, but had never fully acknowledged until that night. For the investigators, it was clear that Emma hadn't planned to kill her sister. But the chain of events that led to that moment was a tragic, irreversible spiral. Lucy's death, while brutal, wasn't premeditated. It was a violent act born from a sudden surge of emotion that Emma couldn't control. In the hours after murder, when Emma was taken into custody, the weight of what she had done seemed to finally hit her. But by then, it was too late. As the case continued to unfold, police pieced together the heartbreaking truth of what had happened behind closed doors. Emma had been living with a storm of emotional turmoil for months. And while it wasn't the sole cause of the murder, it was certainly a factor that contributed to her actions. For Emma, the line between love and anger had blurred beyond recognition. And in that dark, unforgiving moment, the person who had once been her closest companion, her sister, became the target of all the unresolved pain that had built up over the years. The case continues to raise difficult questions. Could this tragedy have been avoided? Should Emma have sought help earlier? Could her family have recognized the warning signs before it was too late? As Emma faces the consequences of her actions, the community and the investigators are left grappling with a haunting truth. Sometimes, the most unexpected people are capable of the unimaginable. Now that you've heard the chilling details of this case, we want to hear from you. What do you think really led Emma to commit such an unimaginable act? Was this a moment of uncontrollable rage? Or were there deeper, underlying issues at play that pushed her to the edge? Could anything have been done to prevent what happened? We know these are tough questions, but that's what makes this case so unsettling. What's your take? Was this a crime driven purely by emotion? Or is there more to Emma's story that we haven't uncovered yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get conversation started. If you're passionate about exploring true crime and want more stories like this, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the latest investigations we dive into. We value your opinion, and we can't wait to hear what you think. The news spread quickly. Emma Jones was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The crime that had shattered her family now moved to the courtroom. The trial became a somber event, with every detail exposing the painful truths behind the bond that once united two sisters. No one could have anticipated the layers of betrayal and heartbreak that would be revealed within those walls. As Emma sat in the defendant's seat, her face was a mask of confusion and sorrow. The courtroom was a mix of tension and disbelief. On one side, the aggrieved, hearts heavy with the loss of a young woman who was once full of life. On the other side, the family struggled with a complicated reality. The same woman they had once loved now stood accused of taking the life of her own sister. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Emma's actions that night, describing the brutal nature of the crime. But Emma's defense team, in a last-ditch effort to save her, argued that her mental state had been shattered by years of unresolved trauma. They presented Emma as a woman who had been suffering in silence, a woman who, despite her outward appearance, had been drowning in emotional turmoil. They argued that her relationship with Lucy had been deteriorating long before the fatal confrontation, a powder keg waiting to explode. Throughout the trial, the defense called upon mental health experts who testified to Emma's history of depression and anxiety, suggesting that these struggles had clouded her judgment and pushed her to a breaking point. The question that lingered throughout the trial was whether Emma's actions had been premeditated or a tragic consequence of years of unaddressed psychological pain. As the days of testimony wore on, the emotional weight became unbearable for everyone involved. For the family, there was no easy answer. How could a loving sister commit such an unimaginable act? The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Tension was high as the family awaited a verdict that would forever alter their lives. When the decision finally came, the courtroom was silent, as if holding its breath. The verdict was clear Guilty. Emma Jones was convicted of first-degree murder. In the aftermath, there was no sense of closure. The trial had exposed the deep wounds within the Jones family, but it had also raised more questions. Could Emma have been saved? Could the family have done more to help her? Would things have turned out differently if Emma had reached out for help, or if her struggles had been recognized earlier? These questions will haunt the family for years to come. Emma was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the emotional toll of the crime was far from over. Lucy's family would never see her again, and they would also live with the guilt of Emma's actions. The sisters, who once shared everything, would now remain forever separated by the walls of prison cell and the memory of a night that changed everything. As the years passed, the case became a painful reminder of the complexities of family relationships and the dangers of unspoken emotions. Emma, from behind bars, would occasionally speak out about her regrets and the trauma that had shaped her life, but for many, her words came too late. In the end, this was more than just a tragic crime. It was a devastating look at the dark side of family dynamics, the hidden pain that festered beneath the surface, and the consequences of letting unresolved issues spiral out of control. And for those left behind, the scars would never truly heal.